I think that this taps into a deeper narrative and a deeper pattern of what is happening out of this administration, where they believe that the rule of law only belongs and applies to some people and not others. Right here and now, we're about 20 years away from the Central Park Five, where the president put out a full-page ad demanding the death penalty for 5 Black and brown boys. They were not yet 18 years old, demanding the death penalty for something they were accused of and innocent of. And here we have just documented evidence of multiple times of violation of the same law, and he won't even issue a slap on the wrist. This is a pattern about some people being subject to the rule of law and others not. And when that happens, there is no rule of law at all. And that's why it's important that we make sure that everyone is held accountable, because whether it's a billionaire, whether it's an administration official, or whether it's a postal worker or a kid on the street, we all must be held accountable to the same extent by the rule of law.
This is AOC calling out this administration's selective pursuit of justice, calling for cruel extrajudicial punishments for some, and then utter disdain for the rule of law when it comes to others. AOC rightly points out Trump's demand in 1989 for the Central Park Five, a group of Black teenagers, to be executed, underscored by a full-page ad that Trump purchased in the New York Times for $85,000. Even after the boys were exonerated because the actual perpetrator admitted to the crime that they were accused of, and because of DNA evidence, Trump still refuses to back down, claiming regardless that they should be held accountable for something that someone else did. Yep, sounds about right. Compare that to his senior advisor, Kellyanne Conway, whose violations of the Hatch Act were so egregious and repeated that Henry Kerner, chief of the White House's Office of Special Counsel, a Trump appointee, called for her to be fired. The Hatch Act is a 1939 law that prohibits employees of the executive branch, except the president, vice president, and certain other designated officials, from engaging in some forms of political activity, like affecting elections or going about its activities in a partisan manner. And that includes Kellyanne Conway, quote, disparaging Democratic presidential candidates while speaking in her official capacity during television interviews and on social media. And she's done so on countless occasions, enough to warrant a hearing into her lawlessness for which she didn't even bother to show up. And yet still Trump has refused to fire her. Trump, the so-called law and order candidate,
I am the law and order candidate,
isn't even entertaining the idea of holding a White House official accountable for her glaring violations of the law. Maybe if she had done something really serious, like been Black in a park, then maybe we'd see some accountability from this administration. Ironically, Kellyanne did acknowledge her violations, where else but on Fox and Friends.
Kellyanne, you were in the eye of the storm last week or a week ago. Sorry, they're all blending together. As some ethics committee came out and said you have multiple violations of the Hatch Act, saying that you're mixing politics and government business. And they're threatening, if you don't come testify, to subpoena you. Where does that stand? What do you say about it?
Well, it'd be good if everybody had a quick tutorial on the Hatch Act, what it is and what it is not. It's not even clear to us here at the White House, according to White House counsel, that the Hatch Act applies to assistance to the president. It's not even clear what the Hatch Act allows. I would be the first, we think I'd be the first member of the West Wing to ever be hauled in front of Congress to talk about the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act means that you can't advocate for or against the election of an individual. And if I'm talking about the failures of Obama-Biden care, if I'm talking about the fact that 28 million Americans have no health insurance, that's a fact. Right. If I'm quoting what some of the candidates say about the other candidates, I'm just repeating the news to you as I read it that day. You know what they're mad about? They want to put a big roll of masking tape over my mouth.
And here we got the full Kellyanne special. She first claimed that she doesn't know what the Hatch Act is, then only moments later goes on to fully explain it. Because nothing says, I had no idea this was an offense, quite like defining the offense. Because ultimately, despite Kellyanne's obfuscation and diversionary tactics, this isn't about anything other than her disdain for the law. She just doesn't care. And the person who can actually hold her accountable, he doesn't care either. That's why in this very interview in which Fox and Friends gives her a soapbox from which to spew her lies unchallenged, she actually takes a swipe at Biden. She renames Obamacare to Obama-Biden Care before using it as a proxy with which to bash the Democratic presidential candidate. And she does this literal seconds after defining the Hatch Act as precluding her from advocating for or against the election of an individual. In other words, this administration isn't just hiding their lawlessness, they're flaunting it. And so Trump can continue to parade his administration around amid claims that he's drained the swamp, but the swamp has never been worse. And you don't have to look farther than the first one to take to the airwaves, Kellyanne Conway.